Preparing for the future. Maybe you've stumbled upon this recording because you're thinking about how do you get ready for a very uncertain future. Certainly something I've spent a lot of time looking at and studying and reading articles about, watching videos on, and I have a lot of thoughts about it, things I'm going to bring together for you today to connect some dots. If maybe you've watched the videos and you saw the person that said buy Bitcoin, you saw the person that said buy gold, you saw the person that said buy real estate, you saw the person that said put all the money in the stock market, and you're saying, well, I don't know which of these to pick. I don't know where to go among all these choices. And also, I don't believe maybe this is all going to work and that maybe they're just trying to sell me this because they're getting a commission. Today, we're going to dive into the reality of preparing for a uncertain future and really trying to be practical with what we're doing and how that looks. So, I'm Shawn McBride. I am a business lawyer by career. This channel is about the future of business and helping business owners and business leaders get ahead. And I think part of that is preparing for the world that we live in. I mean, let's face it, there is a lot going on and a lot going on behind the scenes. You don't have to wait very long, and there's articles about the US did this behind the scenes or China did that behind the scenes. It's almost constant that US, China, Russia, all these countries are doing things that are going on behind the scenes and they all have an impact. Meanwhile, the US national debt around $36 trillion at the time of recording here, January 2025. That's the recorded debt. A lot of people think the unrecorded debt might be closer to $200 trillion. And if you take that and divide it over the population of the US, around 350, 400 million people, you start ending up with maybe around $500,000 per person, including people that aren't working, retired, etc. Right? This is a massive number that the U.S. is committed to pay out in the future. Right? So essentially, everybody is behind the ball already, and then we have demographic issues where the birth rate in the U.S. is not necessarily going to support the population in the future. So without immigration, we're going to run into some real demographic problems. And so you've got to have the reality of, is this sustainable? Meanwhile, Trump is now talking about taking on more territory, expanding the U.S., and that may be in part due to all of this. All of this for you and me, whether we're in America or elsewhere, just leads to a great deal of uncertainty. Is the U.S. going to continue to keep its leadership? What is the economy going to look like? Are these debts going to get paid? Very likely they will, right? Between you and me, right? They can just print the money, right? That's the reality of it. And I've got a video coming up here on the channel where we talk about Bitcoin and whether the U.S. can switch over to it. So I'll go into more detail in that video that's coming up very soon. So if you're interested in that topic, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Keep a lookout for that video, which will be coming in the near future. But regardless of this, at some point, this $36 trillion of dollars needs to be paid or refinanced or whatever. So that reality is going to come home at some point, and it's such a massive number and such a massive tidal wave of how do we deal with it, right? Will we actually have future taxes that are sufficient to pay back that $36 trillion, or more likely, will the government just create book entries and say, here's your money, and just create more money and pump it into the economy? And we all recently saw a lot of inflation. Many economists trace that back to the printing of money. So holding dollars is very scary, right? That's why a lot of people tell you you're almost forced to be a speculator. If you watch Tom Blue's work, he talks a lot about the fact that all of us are forced to be speculators because there's so much uncertainty. And I certainly feel that, right? We feel like we can't keep money in a savings account. Even so much so that, I see articles or I see posts where people are, 6 months or a year from buying a house, and they don't feel like they could even keep the money in a bank account for 6 months because they know inflation is going to be so bad, and perhaps they can't even keep up with the cost of the house over that 6 month period because their inflation is growing at a minuscule interest rate. Their savings is growing at a minuscule interest rate, while inflation is outpacing it in real terms, right? Regardless of what the government statistics say, many people feel like inflation in real world, when you actually go to buy stuff, cash keeps getting weaker and weaker over time, right? That is the reality. So, here today we're going to jump into it. Not investment advice, obviously. I am just a guy on YouTube, as the money mindset guy would say, or minority mindset guy would say. I'm just some guy on YouTube, and I'm like him. I'm just talking and giving you my ideas, a piece of information, education that you can use to go there. So, but I think what I have here for you is valuable as part of your mix of information, and then you can make your investment decisions between yourself, your investment advisors, etc. We talked about a couple categories early on in the show, and I'm going to kind of break them down a little bit. Bitcoin is very interesting, right? And I love the fundamentals of it, right? You have a good recorded ledger. It's clear who owns what. The transactions are verified, and you can't create more of Bitcoin, right? It's formulaic. There is a certain amount of Bitcoin. It's created through the system for people doing mining activity, but at the fundamental, we know how much Bitcoin there's going to be. So a lot of people love it for that, right? And there's a thought out there that at some point, if US dollars or other global reserve currencies become untrustworthy, that people will flip to use Bitcoin as a currency. What we haven't seen a lot of so far is people actually using Bitcoin as a currency, right? People talk about it, people think about it as a future. People go to a coffee shop once in a while and do a transaction and transmit a Bitcoin. It does get done, but it's usually not a common thing, right? It's not what most people are doing. There's not a lot of people running around spending Bitcoin to buy a cup of coffee or to buy a dinner. And most restaurants aren't going to take it. It's just not a currency yet. And the thought is at some point it becomes a currency. Of course, the reality is, because of the transaction costs and difficulties of doing small transactions, it would probably be a base currency. And then there would be things like credit cards or, bank accounts or other things denominated in Bitcoin where you would do all your transactions, and then, the banks would settle up with blocks of Bitcoin moving back and forth depending on the net transactions, right? Much like what we do today with our dollars, right? Our banks settle at the end of the month or end of the week or whatever. They settle up for all the transactions that are happening, and some money gets moved between banks, largely on electronic ledgers. You can see the same type of thing happening on Bitcoin. So my personal view, I've expressed that here on other videos on it, that Bitcoin is a backup currency. People are speculating in it. I think it perhaps has a place to be considered in a portfolio. But I think it's going to be binary. Either everybody's going to jump into Bitcoin at the last minute because there's going to be some type of crisis and people are going to jump into it. They're not going to trust the US dollars or other global currencies. Or it's going to get regulated really bad and really get pushed out of the way. And we've already seen efforts to that direction in the US. The new Trump administration coming in will probably reverse a lot of that, go Bitcoin friendly, but that could easily reverse back, right? And that's a phenomenon we're seeing here in the US that I think all of us need to keep an eye on, right? There's so much flip-flopping right now, right? Biden had a wave of executive orders when he took office. We're sitting here right before Trump is going to take office at the time of recording, and he's talking about having a wave of executive orders. So, we're going both ways here, right? And so we can watch that wave go another direction, perhaps, right? People get frustrated, they get upset about, Trump's leadership 4 years from now, and, a group of people is going to want to bring somebody else in, and we're going to flip the other direction, right? So this flip-flopping and these fast changes seem like they're part of the U.S. system now, right? And so that's very, very hard to plan around when we're talking about preparing for the future, right? So Bitcoin can go from being, well supported, loved, etc., to being hated, right? And watch my video on Bitcoin. It's coming up here on the Future Done Right channel if you want to dive more into that. Also talked about gold, silver, precious metals, right? These have been used as currency in the past. They used to be kind of the center of a lot of currencies, including the US dollar. At one point, you could actually redeem the US dollar for gold. And that was allowed for some period of time. And then we took the US off the gold standard. And of course, the US has lost a lot of value. So there's a lot of people out there that think, gold, silver, these kind of precious metals that are scarce, Can't just print more of them, right? There's only so much. Even with all the mining activity, the base of these metals only goes up so much per year. They're very precious. That's why they call them precious metals. Uh, those are interesting because they will store value. They also have problems with them, right? They're not productive assets. Um, all they do is appreciate based on their scarcity, right? They're not working for you. When you put money in the stock market, you put money in real estate, it's working for you. You put money in gold, you put money in Bitcoin, it's not working for you, right? Would you want to just put your cash in a zero interest bank account? That's essentially what you're doing with gold and Bitcoin. You are saying there is nowhere to actually deploy and use my money that is more valuable than just stacking it, right? Or just holding on to it, right? I'm not doing anything to let my money actually work for me. I am just betting on the fact that dollars and things are going to depreciate so much. And there's people that say, an ounce of gold would buy one, nice man's suit or whatever it is, right? And that's true throughout time. If you go all the way back to Roman era, the equivalent of a suit to today, there's the thought that 1 ounce of gold has held the same amount of value. The thing is, if you had 1 ounce of gold in Roman times and you invested it properly, it would be worth a fortune today. Versus just holding 1 ounce of gold. If you buried 1 ounce of gold underneath a mattress in Roman times, and your linear descendants found it years later, that money didn't do anything. It didn't produce anything other than just hold value. So that's one problem with both Bitcoin and gold as a hedge. And as we get through the other two here, I'm going to talk about what I do think a good idea to think about to diversify your investment portfolio is. Another option that we haven't covered yet. Real estate. Real estate's very interesting. It has been a classic wealth creator here in the U.S. The idea being deploy your money and put it into real estate. And I can see why you would want to do that, right? The problem with the real estate market here in the U.S. is it's getting political as well as everything else. We saw during the pandemic that the government came in and told real estate owners that they essentially couldn't evict people if it was connected to the pandemic, right? If your tenants filled out certain forms and said certain things, you were forced to pay the mortgage, but you didn't have any rent coming in, right? That gets very scary for somebody who has a small base of properties, or if there's a future event that's very widespread, right? Because even big players could be taken down if 20, 30, 40% of your tenants are not paying rent, which is possible in a larger event with similar laws enacted. So the certainty of real estate isn't there. Plus, now the insurance rates are going sky high. People are having tough times making their budgets. If people don't have jobs, if people can't pay, they can't pay the rent. We're starting to see some real estate actually go down in value in certain markets in the U.S. So rental real estate is probably a solid place to look at, but you need to go in with a degree of caution and understand there's a lot of fundamental issues stirring right now, and we have a potential for perhaps another real estate market correction because honestly, people's incomes are not keeping up with the rent rates or the values of properties right now. There's a strong disconnect between what the average person's making and what real estate costs. Stock market is also uncertain. A lot of people think this is a bubble. One thing we have seen in recent years is that it looks like corporate profits keep marching up as people pay more for things. As inflation hits, these companies have been able to keep those profits going to their bottom line, which increases the value of their stock. So I think all of us have watched the stock market have a tremendous run, even with all the economic disruption we've had. There's a lot of questions about whether that'll continue, right? We just don't know what's going to happen on that front. So a lot of questions here. So I think diversification, at least for me personally, is a good idea, right? Being in a couple of these different buckets without focusing on any one. But the other thing, even with all the uncertainty, even as terrible as things could get, the potential for countries getting realigned, which brings up all the issues on the table, right? I mean, there's talk about U.S. acquiring Canada There's also other people talking about the U.S. splitting up or whatever the case may be. It becomes real questions of what happens with the money and what happens with historical assets if we get one of these massive transformations that's kind of unprecedented. Um, but the thing that they really can't take away from you is your know-how, right? And you're here watching this video right now, adding to your know-how, thinking about this, your health, right? And of course, we all age. As we age, generally health issues tend to arise, but healthy eating, exercise, a good program, educating yourself, eating the right foods, doing all the right things is an investment in you, and that makes you a little more independent, a little less dependent on the system, a little more economically viable on your own if you don't have massive medical bills and other things. So, wherever you are, what steps can you take to be a little healthier and to be a little more independent, right? And I know everybody's got different constraints around it, but just something to think about. How can I invest in myself, right? Because you is something that's going to be with you for the rest of your life, right? You're going to be with yourself. That body is going to carry you forward regardless of what all these changes are, whether you move internationally as things shift, whether you lose your land through taxation, which some people worry about, right? A lot of the things that you physically have, investment accounts can be inflated away. You can lose a lot of things, but yourself is something that's going to stay there. So when you're thinking about preparing for the future, don't only think about these investment categories I've talked about here. Think about investing in yourself and what can you do to make yourself more valuable, to have skills so that you can re-earn income if you have to, right? I think the reality is if things get as bad as some people think, is people are going to be surprised at the loss of value in their investments. They're going to be surprised that some things go sideways, but there's going to be the opportunity to potentially move forward with yourself and to rebuild, right? And if there's a big disruption, there will be opportunity. History shows us that as we come out of periods of great disruption, great wealth is built. But a lot of people do have to start over and rebuild. So preparing for the future partially is about being ready for a new reality. If you have questions or ideas for future videos, please drop them below. I love to hear those comments and get those ideas so that I can potentially tailor videos to your needs. If you're enjoying this, please consider subscribing. We'll have more content coming up about the future of business and making ourselves better and stronger. So please consider subscribing to the channel and engaging, and share this with your friends if you think they'll find it of value. I'm Shawn. I'll see you guys for another video soon. I hope you have enjoyed this. I hope it's opened some thoughts, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your reactions in the comments. I'll see you guys for another video soon.